So the Reserve Bank governor's made it clear that the economy is expected to explode, to go very well. And we're starting to see signs of that, of course, Melbourne, Sydney, that have come out of lockdown. But as international tourism kicks in and things start to return to normal, the economy is going to be very, very good. Now, Michael, I think that in terms of the political thing, and this is the main point of the show, most people watching right now, the Prime Minister with a good economy, a low death rate, and a vaccination rate that's going to be the highest in the world. These are the perfect conditions to be going to the Australian people with.
Yeah, well, mate, I've never thought the election would be fought on COVID, and I still don't think it will be. I think the electorate's moved on for that. Look how quickly we moved to, the global world, the whole planet being incinerated. That was last week. Now something different. The bottom line is this. What is underpinning, one of the things underpinning our strong economic growth, and it's 5.5% next year and the same, or 6% the year after, coming from a low base obviously, is low interest rates. As long as interest rates remain low, we're going to have a very strong economy and people will do well. But you give Labor Party the keys to the lodge, given their economic record over the years. We all remember Keating's 90% interest rates. You give Labor the key to the lodge with unlimited spending, which is what they're known for.
Great point.
You look at what happens to interest rates and the bond market. So that's the big worry for Labor going forward. They have a poor economic record for the entirety of their career, bar that period between 83 and 96. Apart from that, these people are, they are the fiscal knuckle draggers who think you can just spend without saving and spending without taxing. That's Labor's big risk going forward, and that's Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg's number one weapon, that they will keep interest rates low, whereas under Labor, interest rates are a massive risk for families and businesses.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Sophie, also hyperinflation, which has been happening in the United States, in part comes out of huge amounts of spending that have come out of the Biden administration. Now, of course, there was already trillions of dollars before we got to the extra trillions, before we get to the next group of trillions. And even, the bearded boss of Twitter recognises hyperinflation is a problem.
Oh, absolutely, Paul. But I think if we just go back to household spending for a moment, there's a lot of people that have done really well throughout the pandemic, Paul, that have large amounts of cash that they've hoarded because they've been able to continue on doing their jobs at home, doing their Zoom calls. They're quite happy. They've piled up this money because they haven't been spending it. But there's also a lot of people, as Michael mentioned, small businesses that have done it extremely tough, that don't have this cash sitting there like some of us do. And my concern is if interest rates do rise, because they eventually will, how are all these people who've taken on these ginormous loans, Paul, going to service them? I think people have taken on far too much household debt. In saying that, a lot of people have really attacked it during the pandemic, but there's a real mix out there of some people who've done really well throughout the pandemic and others that have been smashed to smithereens financially.
Well, we talked about this last week. I think it's an extra $230 billion that has been added in household debt on top of what was already there before, the many hundreds of billions, probably a couple of $1 trillion. Campbell, this is the truth, right? Elections have consequences. This in part, is what's always on the line, which is, restraint is important with budgets. Clearly, you can have an argument about, some of that restraint, if not all of it, kind of went out the window due to trying to create a social safety net. I stand by JobKeeper as an idea. I'd prefer to find a way to pay off debt than to find a way to get millions of people back into the employment market. That's just me. But it does matter, because if you end up in a scenario where even if the Reserve Bank says, which it has currently, interest rates don't rise till 2023, well, if Labor changes some economic policy and starts doing what they've been doing in the Biden administration, it's not 2023, it becomes a whole lot earlier in 2022.
Well, mate, I'd put it like this. Inflation is coming. It's here now. And interest rates are going up right now. And I work in this space in my day job. And so interest rates will be up by between 1 and 1.5% by 2023. I mean, that's my view, mid-2023. Think about that from on an average mortgage in Sydney. I think it's $750,000 a year. Just call it 1%, easy maths, $7,500 extra interest payments for that homeowner.
Do you think it gets worse with Labor,
that money being well, I don't think I think Labor would be worse. I can't disagree with you there. But that's money sucked out of the economy. The problem for the coalition, frankly, is I'm not seeing the restraint that we once saw from them. And I think they washed the ideological and philosophical foundations of the Liberal Party out from beneath their feet about 14 to 15 months ago. And back around March, April this year, when they got a bit more money, when things looked a bit better, they promptly went and spent it. And that's not the culture or the values of the Liberal Party. It's one of the reasons I left, I have to say.
No, I get it. But Michael, the whole point was I think that so much of that spending in 2020, 2021 was about a social safety net that meant millions of people didn't end up unemployed, that hundreds of thousands of businesses didn't explode.
That's correct.
So I agree. Like sitting at the end, we're now getting the bill, right? And you go, gee whiz. But there are reasons to go into debt and there are bad reasons to go into debt. And I think a social safety net,
So are they going to curtail it now, is the question.
Well,
that's what they need to do now.
Great question. My Prime Ministership has come and gone, mate.
Well, mate, I'm backing you. Remember, I'm backing you. I'm on that ticket with Michael. But I've seen stories only in the last fortnight. Yeah, but in the last fortnight, I've seen stories in the Australian where I read stories which must have been leaked saying, another lazy 45 billion over the next 3 years or so, and the coalition's ready to spend 20 billion in election sweeteners. I mean, we can't keep doing this, mate.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Pull this back. That's what I'm looking for.
And I'm not doing it for a debating point, but just worth noting here. Remember, there was a hole in the budget. I don't know the exact number. I have a feeling it might have been about $9 billion, might have been a bit more, which was decisions made but not yet announced. Now, whether what we're hearing about, when they go to COP and say, here's $1 billion for that, and I don't know whether all of that's in there. Obviously, a lot of that was planning about an election. The assumption is that if they can get a budget out before the election and things are getting better, but the problem is, what are they going to spend the money on? Now, I mean, here's the political question, Michael, right? Which is that, myself, all of us here are going to agree we've got to cut debt, right? I've been there like all the way through, right? But as Sophie just said, in people's lived life, in their real life, they take on debt. So it's one of those things that, frankly, it's a little bit like, should there be action on climate change? Absolutely. Are you willing to pay anything for it? No. So I think that the issue of should we pay debt, people go, absolutely. So what would you cut? Nothing. So what revenue would you increase? Nothing.
That's right. The other thing about debt is this: people don't personalise it to themselves, even though they got some money from the federal government during the COVID tragedy of last year. People don't think it's their problem. They didn't run it up. They're not responsible for it. Someone else ran it up and someone else will fix it. They don't fear debt as much as they used to. And one of the reasons that are intuitively right on that is because interest rates are so low. I mean, you've got negative interest rates in some parts of Europe. So the interest burden on government debt is much smaller than it used to be. Governments can borrow in Australia at less than 1%. I mean, inflation's higher than that. And as long as you have a fiscally responsible government, over the next 10 years, you will ultimately get to a situation where we get into surplus and we start paying down the debt. Now, of course, there are people that want to move faster and quicker, like Campbell, and I personally, certainly respect that view. But what the government did last year was give people back money. They put money straight into the pockets of businesses and individuals. They had to borrow, of course, dramatically to do that. But giving people back their own money and some borrowed money is never particularly a bad thing in times of crisis, and that's what the Liberal government did. And I think they're absolutely right to do so, Paul.
All right, but again, in the same way, do you get credit for keeping cases down? Do you get credit for why? In the end, it's about who can make the better message about how big it is and what you attack it with. Now,